Welcome home to St. Anne's. We want you to know that you're welcome to join us at 10 a.m. on Sundays. Please be sure to hit subscribe to receive our sermons.
I know, when I read my own gospel, it goes a lot faster. All right, well, happy Baptism Day. If you know me, you know that this is one of my favorite days. I love baptisms. But I think it's a perfect gospel reading to go with baptisms, to be honest with you. So I want to break it open a little bit because this gospel is, it's a difficult one, I think. Even though it's very commonly cited and we talk about it a lot, I think it actually is a really difficult one to dive into and to think about. And here's why. Because I think it matches our own experiences so much. Have you ever been in a situation where you feel like you're drowning and overwhelmed and you're like, dear God, you could show up now? Just me? Just me. I'm the only person who's ever been like, now would be a good time. And you're like, hey, committed to this whole Christian thing, where are you? And so I think this gospel reading maybe hits a little too close to home because we're kind of on the disciples' side right here. I mean, am I the only person who sides with the disciples on this one? And a lot of gospel, we side with Jesus a lot of the time. We're like, yeah, I'm with Jesus on this one. This one, I'm pro-disciple. Not gonna lie. I'm like, hey, you could show up. You're just laying there taking a nap. Now would be a good time. And sometimes I think because we're reading the text so much later and it's a translation, we don't always pick up Jesus' sarcasm. And I know I've talked to you guys before about Jesus having an intense sense of humor and being a very, very sarcastic person. So I love when Jesus wakes up and he's like, still getting the eye goobers out of his eye, And he's like, what? Anyone else have experience with teenagers getting up? And you've yelled at them 25 times? And they finally crawl out and they're like, what? What? I mean, this was literally this morning because here's how our morning goes. The person who sits before you on Sunday morning is not the mother who gets us out of the house. Okay? This is a person who's had time to calm down. Also, we're leaving on vacation, like as soon as the service ends. So there's kind of a timeline. And I have an almost 13-year-old who would sleep perpetually given the option. And so I will take one. I will give my husband credit. He was the yeller this morning, and I appreciate that. I appreciate not always being the yeller. But somebody had to every 25 minutes say, get up, get up, get up. We finally wander downstairs. What? Do I have time for waffles? Welcome to the party. The dip is mostly gone, but we're glad you're here. Yes. Is there time for waffles? And can you just imagine Jesus saying that? Anybody got any food? Did somebody pack snacks? Somebody crack open a cold one. And they're all just like, we've got to go. We've got a problem. And Jesus is like, what? What? And so obviously he's sarcastic when he's like, what? Do you still lack faith after everything? He doesn't mean that literally, people. He's being sarcastic of like, yeah. Okay, here's the thing. You and I in our culture are often given a false message that if you commit to the Christian life, it's all going to be just fine. You ever hear that? You ever hear you're struggling and someone in their great wisdom says to you, God's got a plan. God won't give you anything that you can't handle. God might not, but life will. And I adore Mother Teresa because she has a quote. She's like, I just wish God wouldn't trust me so much. And I feel like that's really what I want to say when people are like, God won't give you anything that you can't handle. Life will give you things that you can't handle. Committing to the Christian faith will not make life completely easy for you. And I would love to say, Maggie, because I love committing kids to Christ and I love committing everybody to Christ, I would love to say from here on out, smooth sailing. But this gospel will tell you absolutely not. Absolutely not. Being committed to Christ does not alter anything that life is going to throw your way. It will not change the seas that you are sailing. It will change who's in the boat. And that's the power of baptism. The power of baptism is who is in your boat. Because here's the thing. Life is going to be rough, and we're going to be afraid. And that's okay. There are things that are going to be overwhelming and terrifying and scary. And that's okay. There are going to be things that we feel ill-equipped to even handle. Things that we feel like we cannot handle. It doesn't change those things. It changes who's in the boat. It changes the fact that none of those things are done alone. Because sometimes in the human condition, it can feel really, really alone. But in baptism, we say we're not doing this alone. We're doing this as a community. Because baptism is the entrance into the Christian faith, the entrance into the Christian family. And it was interesting because I guess we really don't talk about these things all that much. And so to get ready for today, we did a lesson on baptism and stuff with all the kids. And there were certain things that came out in that I was like, oh, I guess we don't talk about that. And one of the things that I think is really, really important, and I never thought to point it out until we were sitting there in the class and doing it, we don't use your last name when we go through the baptism service. In fact, I ignore the bulletin because it says Margaret. And this Margaret is kind of like this Margaret, and we don't like to go by Margaret. She wants Maggie. And look, I don't want to be baptized in Margaret. If I could go back in time and fix it, I probably would. But like, somebody change that. Have you ever heard the story of when I didn't know my name was Margaret? I really didn't. Because my father wanted to name his daughter after his mother, right? And her name was Margaret. This has nothing to do. I know, it's a good name as long as you don't have to go by it. Margie. There ain't a Margaret in this room that goes by it. And there's multiple Margarets in this church. There are a lot of Margarets, ain't none of them go by Margaret. And so and my mom said, fine, whatever, but she will never go by it. She'll go by Meg. So guys, I didn't know my name was Margaret. Did not know. I started kindergarten. I went to Roman Catholic schools. I think some of you know that. I had a nun in kindergarten, Sister Margaret Ann. I know. She had the misfortune of actually going by it. Bad choice. Anyway, so we're doing roll. Margaret Clark. Margaret. I didn't know. Finally, she's like, your name is Margaret. I was like, no, it's not. My name is Meg. That was a horrible way to find out. Oh, man, Lord Almighty. Anyway, that has nothing to do with the sermon. It just has to do with the fact that when we do baptism, we don't use your last name. Because in baptism, our last name is all the same. It's Christ. Did you guys know that? Yeah, I know. I didn't even think to tell you all that until the kids were bringing it up, and I was like, oh, yeah, I guess I should tell you guys that. There are all sorts of really cool things in the Episcopal Church that we just, don't talk about. But there is a deep theology and deep presence in them. So when we do baptism, we are all committed to the same family. We all do this together. So there is another quote from a Maggie that I absolutely love. And it goes, Maggie Kuhn. Does anyone know who Maggie Kuhn is? She's the head of the Grey Panthers. Anyone know who the Grey Panthers are? You might know the quote, however. So Maggie Kuhn was an activist And I think she's like 65 or 70 or something when she retires, and she starts the Gray Panthers. Now, I'm a firm believer that the world will change when old women take over. Yeah. So Maggie Kuhn was an activist. And I know, I trust old women. Absolutely. That's who should run the world. We keep trusting old men. No, stop. Stop. We need post-menopausal women in charge because they don't care anymore. They're just going to tell you, and they're just going to get it done. They don't mess around. We premenopausal women, we're worried about stuff. We're anxious. We're worried. We're still people-pleasing. Post-menopausal women are like, hey, I'm ready for war. Let's go. That's who I trust. Anyway, Maggie Kuhn was one of them. So she started the Gray Panthers, which was a group of female activists. And they really, really fought against the idea that older people don't have a say or don't have anything to offer. But she was a really, really powerful activist. And here's the quote from her that you may know. And I think it's so, so very, very important. So I offer this to my Maggie, and I offer this to all of us. Speak, even if your voice shakes. Because sometimes we are so afraid. The water and the storms are so big and so terrifying, and they're taking over our boat, aren't they? And it takes the voice out of us. Because all we can think to do is scream. And sometimes we don't even have it to scream, right? And so when she says, speak, even if your voice shakes, wake Jesus up. Wake up the other people in your boat, because your boat is not empty. Look around you. You have a very packed boat. Kids, look around you. You have a packed boat. None of this will make the storms go away. But I promise you, you will never face the storms alone. So shall we do a baptism? All right.
We want you to know that you're welcome to join us at 10 a.m. on Sundays.
I really feel like every time
Please be sure to hit subscribe to receive our sermons. We can't wait to meet you.
Think of all the things that I could get done